Good morning. Thank you for the three of you that said good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Journey Church. My name's Ryan, and I'm one of the staff pastors here at Journey, and that's where we are. And we're so happy to have you here today. You braved the weather. That didn't happen. Thank you again, meteorologists. They got it right last time, so we had to assume, right? But anyway, so we're so glad that you came here with us today in person and online. There's a couple important things if you're new here or you've been here just a few times, just to know about. The first thing is there's a table in the back where you can grab a few things like pens, offering envelopes, Bibles, things like that. There's also a table at the very back to your left, my right, that has those things as well. There's also a blue bucket back there that we'll be referencing quite a bit, maybe a little bit. Just me, actually. I'll just be referencing it, so I'll let you know where it's at every time. And so just so you know where those things are when we talk about them. And if you walked in and and you're new and we haven't met you yet, we have a connection card that we just love you to fill out, and you'll find that in the brown bag with all the extra swag that we gave you today. And you can just fill that out. It's our way to just connect with you, let you know what's happening here, and so we can communicate with you. If you are online, please go ahead and comment in the video comments, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. We want to know that you're with us. We want to know what you're up to. We want to know how we can help you today. If you have any audio issues or anything, make sure you let them know. They're right on track with that. And we just want to make sure you have a great experience online as well. All right. Let's see. The other thing that we have is I want to tell you about is our Journey app. Our Journey app is a great place for you to stay connected with us, not only in service, but throughout the week. If you, whether you're in the Apple Play Store or the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, you can find it using the words Journey Church Des Moines. It's really difficult. So I'm going to repeat it, Journey Church Des Moines. You'll find the app. It's great. We have notes in there that you can follow along for the service. It's also a great place for giving. The other thing that we have that's really cool that we just started, we know that prayer is powerful, and we pray for everybody all the time around here because we really believe in it. But sometimes, it's hard to find us maybe sometimes. And so what we want to do is make something very accessible to you. If you have a prayer request that you can communicate with us, that we'll get 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is the number 657-7623. And when you text that number, we'll get your text, and you'll also get a message back from us just to let you know that we got it. So if you text prayer to that, you want to give it a test, go ahead, try it out. It's awesome, and we'll get it. So if you have the prayer request anytime, please let us know because we want to be praying for you and supporting you in that way. All right, so that's how we start service, but we have some other things that are going on that we want to let you know about. So if you got your notes out, this is a good time. I'm just kidding. I'm going to take your notes out. But follow us on Facebook. We'll let you know about all these things too. The first thing I want to let you know about is February 28th, we have an annual church business meeting. Wow, I expected crickets, but thank you, Pastor Cody. It sounds a lot more formal than it is, but basically we come together once a year just to kind of talk about how things went in the past year, the vision for the new year. If you want to find out all that awesome stuff and learn more about what's happening at Journey from that end of it, you can come to that. It is at 6 p.m. Now, we will do some voting at that meeting, and really the only thing you need to know about voting is if you're a Journey partner or Journey member, you can vote. If you're not a Journey member or partner, you can still come to the meeting. It's just that you won't count in the voting process. So just something there to let you know. We want everybody to be here that wants to be here, but for the voting purposes, partners can do that as well. Now we'll do it in person, but we'll also have an online option as well. So if you don't want to come in, you can be online. So we'll make it accessible to everybody. And the next thing that we have coming up is our next series. Today is the last day of our current series, and this is really fun. The series is called You, Me, Us. And what we're asking is for you to send your questions about relationships. Does anybody have questions about relationships? Yes, good. Everybody else has it figured out, Kevin, so it's just you and me. But so like, who gets the remote when you're streaming at night or during the day? Or, other important stuff like what's for dinner. I don't know. What do you want? I don't know. What do you want? How do you deal with that? We can help you. Tell us what your questions are, and we'll do that. But we're going to start that series next week, actually on 2/7, February 7th. So we want your questions. If you please just send us your questions. There's an email right on the slide there, info@journeydsm.com. Or, you can find any one of us and tell us, and we'll remember, right? No, we won't remember. Email it, please. Email it. Email us your questions because we will talk about them. All right. The last thing we're going to do before we jump into our time of music was we're going to just cover giving. We have a lot of different ways that you can give here at Journey. You can give physically. Remember that blue bucket I was talking about? You can drop your giving in that blue bucket on that table at the back at any point during the service. So we have offering envelopes at the back table and pens that you can use. You can also give online through our website. You can give through our app. Or if you just want to keep the post office alive, you can mail us giving that way. I was reading about this guy that came up and asked Jesus. He was like, listen, I've been doing everything you told me to do. I've been following all the rules. And what else do I need to do? Like, what's the next step? How do I get into heaven? Now, Jesus, he knew that this guy was a man with a lot of means. He had a lot of possessions, a lot of wealth. And Jesus said, well, the last thing you need to do is sell everything and come follow me. Well, the guy walked away, decided he wasn't going to do that. And what struck me is, this is a story about this guy selling everything. And it made me think like, well, what does that have to do with me and my money and my things? And, kind of what I realized in studying is that it's not really about how much money or wealth you have. It's about where your priorities are with your relationship with Jesus. If you're putting, your money or your things above your relationship with Jesus, then that's something that Jesus would say, hey, let's refocus. Let's talk about that and see how we can come together on that. And this time of giving for us, we set it aside every week, not because we need to pay our bills, but because we think it's very important to worship God and have God as our number one priority. And one way that we can do that is through our giving. And so that's, so during this time, as we're moving into, worship through music, if that's on your mind, just pray about that. And as you're thinking about your giving, and we'll, and that would be great. So we're going to move on into a portion where we sing. So if you would like to stand, that'd be awesome, and sing with us.
Abraham, you're the God of covenant, faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven you do just what you say. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Seal it for thy courts above. Beyond thank you for the debt that you paid on our behalf. We praise you, God, and glorify you. We want to honor you, God. Thank you for your love. You give life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, promises. God, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for walking through life with us. Thanks for being our GPS, God. Thanks for giving us your Holy Spirit, never leaving us to fend for ourselves. We thank you for your great love. Great are you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. You can be seated.
Sometimes life can feel like driving in circles. There is a lot of starting and stopping, twists and turns, but very little progress. That can be frustrating. We all want to end up somewhere. We want to reach our destination. But what can you do today that will help you get there tomorrow? We want to help you take that step with this week's teaching. You have reached your destination.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Great to see all of you here in the room. Great to have all of you with us that are watching online and joining us that way. Really looking forward to sharing with you today the kind of the wrap-up message to this series we've been doing called Recalculating. There's a guy, you may have heard of him. His name's Albert Einstein. And some of you are shaking your head. Never heard of him. You should have paid a little more attention in school, kids. But anyway, he has the theory of relativity and a bunch of other kind of theories and concepts that have really shaped a lot of our scientific world. But Albert Einstein was asked one time, what's the greatest power in the universe? And Albert Einstein's answer was, the power of compounding interest is the most powerful force in the universe. And so Einstein's belief and understanding was this idea that over time, little things become big things if you give them enough time. For instance, you know, if you've got a retirement person or a financial planner that you've worked with, you've heard that, right? And they've talked to you about, hey, you put in so much on a regular basis, and it might not seem like that much, but over time, especially if you start saving for your retirement when you're young, over time, by the time you get old to retire, you're just going to have the money that you need. It's gonna blow you away. Somebody recently, with the latest round of stimulus checks that were being sent out, the COVID stimulus checks of $600, they saw this I thought it was pretty interesting. They said, so if you get a check of $600 per person, and if you have a family of four, so you get $2,400. They said, if you took that $2,400, now I know that some people that are receiving some of these really need them to cover some expenses because of how COVID has affected their job or whatever, but they said, if you just received this and you were to take that $2,400 and you were to put it into a stock account, just a typical kind of a mutual fund type stock account, nothing crazy or super risky, you're not buying GameStop or whatever here, you're just putting it in a regular one and you let it sit there for, and you don't touch it. After about 5 years, that $2,400 would have turned into $3,800. That's good, right? It's over 50% increase. If you let it keep riding for 10 years, that money's going to turn into $6,100. And this is with just regular average returns on the stock market. If you leave it in for 20 years, your $2,400 will become $16,100. And if you leave it in there for 35 years, you will end up with $67,000 due to the laws of compounding interest. Well, then this guy went on to say, if you did that same thing, if you took your $2,400 and you put it in this stock investment account. Now, some of you that are younger, you're getting some free life tips here. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about the stock market or money today, but it's just a good example. If you did that same thing and you put that in, and also he said, the average American receives the average tax return or tax refund for Americans is $2,800. So if you put that $2,400 in your account, and every year you took your $2,800 tax refund and stuck that in there too, by the end of 10 years, you'd have $52,000 in that account. After 20 years, you'd have $181,000 in that account. And after 35 years, you'd have $847,000 by putting in your stimulus checks. And again, I'm not trying to give you life or financial advice. I'm just showing you the power of little things becoming big over time. You've put in about $100,000 at that point in 35 years, and you have $847,000 sitting there. That's pretty good rate of return. And it reminded me of one of my favorite proverbs. Now, there's some cool proverbs and some good parables in the Bible, but this is actually a parable that's not from the Bible, but I've always enjoyed this, and it's always been something that I've kind of lived as a little bit of a mantra for my life, and it's the story of the stonecutter. And the parable of the stone cutter goes like this. There's this stone cutter, and this could either go really well or really poorly here. We're going to see. Either way, it's going to be good, right? So if it goes bad, that's good. But so the stone cutter looks at a piece of stone. This happens to be manufactured stone from Home Depot. But anyway, looks at this stone and wants to cut the stone in a certain place or in a certain way. And so he'll take the chisel, put it to the stone, and give it a hit. And then he'll keep the chisel there, and he'll hit it again. And he'll hit it again and again and again, and he'll keep swinging, and the stone remains unmoved. And then all of a sudden, in the parable of the stone cutter swings, and on his 1,000th swing, he hits the chisel, the stone cracks, and the piece that he wanted to shear away, that he wanted to break up, breaks off, and it becomes the thing that he wanted to create. Now here's what the stone cutter knows. The stone cutter knows it wasn't just that all of a sudden he got a lucky swing on number 1,000. Or that all of the other 999 swings made him strong enough finally to break the stone. Here's what the stone cutter knows. The way that stone broke was not because of that one swing, but it was the compounding of 1,000 blows that caused it to happen. Because over time, little things can become big things when we do them consistently. And it's the same way in our lives. Great changes in your life don't typically happen through a big event. They happen moment by moment, day by day, decision by decision, right? If you came into this year going, I'm going to drop that extra 25 pounds I've been carrying around, you don't get rid of that by working out really hard for a weekend. You wish, but you don't. Or even a week. It takes time. You can do some kind of really dangerous diets or things like that, and you can have a bunch of weight fall off quickly, but it comes right back, right? And so you can't do that. If you want to fix you want to pay off those credit cards, you want to get out of debt, you don't do that quickly. It takes time, and it's that put in an extra $50 on your payment here, and you come into some extra money. Instead of going out and blowing it on something you didn't really need, you put it on, and you do that, and eventually it does that. You don't save your marriage with a really cool Hawaiian vacation. Nothing wrong with a Hawaiian vacation, especially in weather like this. It would be a great boon to anyone's marriage. But if your marriage isn't going well, you're not going to save it by taking your spouse on a really great vacation. You save your marriage day by day, moment by moment, decision by decision, to be the kind of husband, the kind of wife that was going to make a difference. And so we understand that. So we've been talking in this series called Recalculating. We've been asking this question, wouldn't it be great if there was such a thing as a GPS for life? If you could put in your life situations, your decisions you had to make, your issues you had to work through, you could somehow plug them into an app, and it would spit out a route for getting through those things and take you to the place where you want to be. Well, we believe that there is such a thing, that there is this divine direction that God wants to give to us through His Holy Spirit, that He wants to lead us, kind of like a life GPS in these things. We said in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9, it says this: we make plans, but the Lord determines our steps. And so there's this idea that we do have a way to get divine direction and direction for our lives. And so what I kind of said, I think I said it week 1, but I think this is kind of the big idea for this morning, and that's this: decisions become directions, which become destinations. You don't just kind of drift your way to somewhere in life. You make decisions that set you off in certain directions, and those directions take you somewhere, and those are your destinations. We don't want to just live our lives going in circles. I know we've all fallen in love with roundabouts here in this part of the metro area lately. Some of us don't really love them. They're just there. But you don't want to live your life in a roundabout. You want to get somewhere. You want to go somewhere, and your decisions are going to become the directions that ultimately lead you to destinations. And I want to look at something that's probably a really familiar story. If you've been in church for any period of time, you've definitely heard this story talked about. And there's a lot of, there's an amazing, some amazing truths about God and us and in here. And I'm not going to dig into all those. I want to kind of point out one thing in this story, and then I want to talk about how do we make those decisions that will lead us in the right directions and take us where we want to go. The story is the story of the prodigal son. It's a really familiar story. In fact, there's a lot of people who don't even know that much about the Bible or Christianity that understand this idea. In fact, there's a TV show out right now named The Prodigal Son. And in this story, Jesus is trying to help people understand how much God cares about us and how much He rejoices in relationship with us. But I want to read you the story, and I want you to think, as I'm reading this story, think about the choices, the decisions that are being made in this story, okay? So to illustrate this point further, this is found in Luke chapter 15. If you're using one of our Bibles that we have here in the auditorium, it's page 628. Luke 15 in your Bible or on your phone, starting in verse 11. It says, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. In other words, Dad, I can't wait till you die to get my hands on your money. I want it now. Hopefully he didn't do this around Father's Day or anything like that. But a few days later, his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all of his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money on wild living. I don't know 2,000 years ago what wild living was, but he was doing it. And about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. In other words, I'm not asking you to take me back as a son, but could you give me a job? So he returned home to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. It's a great story. But when you read that story, I read it the other day and I thought, look at all of the decisions that got made in just those few verses. Son says, hey, I've decided this, Dad. I want my money now. I'm going to go to my father and tell him, I'm not waiting for you to die. I'd like my inheritance now. And he made that decision. Then he gets the money and he decides what? I'm out of here. I'm not staying around here. I'm going. And he goes to a land that's far away, probably a place where no one knew him, so he could start. Maybe you did that when you went off to college, like, hey, I got a chance to reset who I am, right? Nobody knows me here. I can come in as whatever. And, everyone that, thought I was a nerd in high school, they're not going to be there. I could be cool when I go to college or whatever. But I don't know anyway, he went far away. So he goes there. He makes a decision to what? Live wild. And he ended up losing all of his money because of it. Then he makes a decision, I got to get a job, so I'm going to live. And so he looks for a job, and he gets a job as a pig farmer. Now, I don't know, but I would assume because of the audience Jesus was telling this to, that they would have all envisioned a Jewish family in this story. And so for a Jewish young man, an Israelite, to take a job feeding pigs was about as low as it could get because of they considered the pig, the pork, an unclean animal. And so he takes the most unkosher job that there is. And he's starving. Then he makes another decision. He starts making better decisions. He decides what? I'm going home. Then he decides that he's going to ask his father for a job because he doesn't think maybe will be let in as a son. Then he does something, I think this is important. He decides to actually do what he said he was going to do, and he actually does go home. Right? At one point he said, I should go home. And then he actually had to get up one day and go. He makes a decision to apologize to his father. There's all of these decisions that he's making all along the way, right? He didn't go from heir to a rich man's son with an heir to a fortune to pig slopper in one move, did he? It was a series of decisions that led him somewhere, and it was also a series of decisions that got him home. He got there step by step and turn by turn, and it works for all of us. And I don't know who said it first, but I heard it a bunch of times in my life, and that's this. We are all free to make the decisions we want to make, but we are not free from the consequences of our decisions. We're all free to make the choices we want to make, but we're not free from the consequences of our choices. And so as we're talking about this idea of recalculating and God giving us direction and divine direction, that he wants to direct our steps, we can do that. I believe we can make, so the question I would say is, how do we make wise decisions today that are going to lead us to the right destinations tomorrow? How do we let God direct our steps? And so I want to share something with you that I actually just kind of in October of last year, October 2020, a pastor and author by the name of Andy Stanley wrote a little book. It's little. I read it in a couple days. And it's called Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And he talks about 5 questions that you can ask yourself to help you determine your next move. In other words, how do we make wise decisions that will, again, do what? Affect our directions and lead us to our destinations, who will bring us there. We can ask ourselves the right questions when we make our decisions. And so he shares in there these 5 questions. I want to share them with you and kind of unpack them a little bit if I could. If I don't do a good job of it, buy the book or borrow mine. I'm done with it. But 5 questions we can ask and 5 decisions we can make. The first question is this. He calls it the integrity question. And that's this. Here's the question. Am I being honest with myself really? I think the key word in that sentence is really. Right? Not am I being honest with myself, question mark. Am I being honest with myself? Really? Really? Because don't we all have the capacity to kind of talk ourselves into what we want to do? Anybody ever talk yourself into a decision before? We all have. We all have. In the book, he says this, the easiest person to deceive is the person that you look at every day in the mirror. It's the easiest person for you to fool and deceive is the person you look at every day in the mirror. In fact, in 2016, we live in a kind of a culture that has kind of taken this to a cultural ideal, and that's the idea of, hey, if you believe it, it's true. In fact, in the year 2016, every year the Oxford Dictionary adds a new word of the year, picks a word of the year. The word of the year for 2016, the Oxford Dictionary, was a hyphenated word, post-truth. Post-truth. And they said it in a post-truth era, objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion. In other words, if I feel it, doesn't matter if it's real or not. If I feel it, it's true. It's post-truth. It says there's a tolerance for dishonest, inaccurate allegations and outright denial of facts. Blatant lies become routine. And we all know that one of the easiest people, or the most common people that we lie to is ourselves sometimes, when we want to do what we want to do. Am I being honest with myself really? What are some of the ways we do that? We do that with things like, say, purchases, right? I need this sweater, right? Whatever, all these things. And, we somehow can talk ourselves into just about any of those things and justify why we don't want that sweater. We need it, right? And I need to put this on my credit card. I need to do these things. We do it with relationships, right? We do it, and how many people end up in relationships that aren't healthy and that aren't helping them to grow because they've kind of talked themselves into this. It's better than being alone, or habits, or these other things. A friend of mine used to always say this: your mind will always find a way to justify what your heart desires. Your mind's always going to find a way to justify what your heart desires. It's true, isn't it? I'll give an example of my life. Sometimes I want to eat dessert or something like that, and one of the justifications I'll get is, well, I did go to the gym today. What in the world does that have to do with eating the dessert, right? Or sometimes it's this: I'm going to eat the dessert because I'm planning on going to the gym tomorrow, right? We're going to balance these scales out, although the scales don't balance that way, if you get what I'm saying. But we find ways to talk ourselves into what we want to do. Our mind will always find a way to justify what our heart desires. So why am I doing this really? Why am I avoiding him really? Why, am I continuing to be a part of, do this habit or participate in this behavior really? Why don't I call my mom very often really? To ask ourselves these questions, to say, why, how honest am I being with myself really? So there's a decision that we can make, and here's the decision. That's this: to say, I will not lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. Right? I will not lie to myself even if the truth is something that I don't want to hear from myself. Am I being honest with myself? Am I willing to be not to lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself? That's the integrity question. A second great question we can ask ourselves when we're making decisions and want to let God guide our steps and lead us is this. It's the legacy question. And that's a simple question is this. What story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell about my life? When you look back someday and you look back at kind of the story of my life, what do I want that story to be like? Because decision by decision, we are writing the stories of our lives. So what do we want that to be? Do you want, do you want it to look back and go, I wish I would have finished college and done this, but, or I wish I wouldn't have gone down this road, or I wish I would have done, what did I say yes to that I wish I would have said no to, or what did I say no to that I wish I would have said yes to? But when we're making decisions, we don't tend to think about it in terms of story because decisions are right now. Decisions have to be made. Stories are then, right? But the decisions of today become our stories tomorrow. I've met and you've met people who have gone through some incredibly difficult things, and you've met two kinds of people. You've met people who that time in their life is a part of their story, and you've met people that part of their life became their story, right? And we have to decide, what story do I want to tell? As a pastor, one of the greatest, sometimes I almost want to say joys, but it's not really joy. I'd say one of the things that I just value so much is when I'm given the opportunity or asked to help conduct someone's funeral. And the reason I say that is because I just feel like it's a time where we can really be helpful to families and serve them well. But the thing that I always do, and most of the people I know that do funerals, is before you do that, you sit down with the family or close friends and you say, tell me about so-and-so. Tell me about your dad. Tell me about your grandma. Tell me about your sister. Tell me about your cousin, whoever. And they ask that question. And you know what comes out? You don't get facts and figures. You get what? Stories. The story of their life comes out, and you write it down, and you try and somehow turn that into something that can bring hope and help to people in that time. So the question would be not only what story do you want to tell, but what stories do you want told about you someday? Do you want the story to be told about, he was a good guy, but then he left? How do you want those stories to go? Yeah, we were married and then it got tough, and so we just decided it really wasn't worth it, and so he went his way and I went mine. Or do you want it to be the story of, hey, there was a time where we didn't think our marriage was going to make it, but we decided that for each other and for our kids or whatever, and that becomes the story of endurance and keeping on. We all have the ability, and so a great question that we can ask ourselves as we're making our decisions is, what story do I want this to tell? What story do I want to tell with my life? And so a decision we can make is this: I will write a story that I'm proud to tell, one decision at a time. I'll write a story that I'm proud to tell, one decision at a time. Why? How honest am I being with myself, really? What story do I want to tell? And then there's the conscience question, and that question is this: is there a tension that needs my attention? Is there a tension that needs my attention? Have you ever had to make a decision, or you're doing something and you had just some kind of a feeling in your gut about that decision where something didn't seem quite right, something was a little bit off, maybe you, and have you ever ignored that? Or maybe it wasn't even that subtle, maybe it was like someone close to you kind of said, hey, are you sure about this? Are you sure you want to keep going out with him? Are you sure you want to make this move? Are you sure you want to quit your job? Are you sure? And you've kind of had that tension inside, but you chose to ignore it. There's a great story in the Bible about David. It's in the Old Testament. It's in the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel. David was a young guy that God had promised that one day he was going to become the king of Israel. The only issue was there was a current king of Israel who was not as into the program as David was. And so he wanted to destroy David. He wanted to kill David because he would eliminate the competition, and his name was Saul, and he would remain on the throne. And so he chased David and hunted him down in the wilderness. And so David, and he had a kind of a group, kind of this motley group of characters that ran around with him. And I say that because the Bible tells us that while David was hiding in the wilderness, all those who were distressed or discouraged or in debt came to David, and he became their leader. Wow, what a great group to be in charge of, right? But that's who he was. And they're running, and so they knew Saul was coming close, and they were in an area where there were a bunch of caves, and they went and hid in the cave. And while they're hiding in a cave, Saul and his group come trucking along, and all of a sudden, as Saul is leading his army, they're on this military campaign, nature called. And Saul had to go to the bathroom. I'm not making this up. It's in the Bible. You should read your Bible. There's great stories in there. And he's not just going to do it out in the open. He is the king after all, so he decides to go into one of the caves and relieve himself in the cave. And he happens to pick the cave that David and his guys are hiding out at. So as they're in the back of the cave, and as Saul comes in and he's doing his business there or whatever, David and his men, they all look at each other and think, this is it. This is God, David. He brought Saul right in here. He's all by himself. There's no guards around him, nobody else. We could go up, we could take him out in this cave. You go outside, hold Saul's head up or something like that, and they'd be like, and say, I'm the new king, and this is it. This is the way it's supposed to go. And I don't know how much David thought about it, but all of a sudden, he must have been considering it a little bit, thought maybe this is the golden opportunity that I've been waiting for. But look what it says in 1 Samuel 24. It says, but then David's conscience began bothering him. Actually, what he did is instead of killing Saul, he snuck up so close to him that he cut part of his robe off and then snuck back. Saul was very occupied with what he was doing. And David comes back, and so David did that, but he didn't even kill Saul, but it still bothered him what he did. He said his conscience began bothering him. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this to the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. So David restrained his men. Some versions say he rebuked his men and did not let them kill Saul. It was like all of a sudden David had this, what seemed to be a golden opportunity, but he chose in that moment not to act on it and to listen to that kind of feeling deep down in his heart, that check in his gut that said, don't do this. So as we're making decisions, thinking about it, we should ask ourselves questions like, am I being honest with myself, really? We should ask the question of what story do I want to tell with my life? Because these decisions are going to add up and they're going to tell a story. What story do I want to tell? And we can also ask this question of, is there any tension in me? Is there a tension that needs my attention? And the decision we can make as we ask ourselves that question is this, is I will explore rather than ignore my conscience. I'll explore rather than ignore my conscience. I think these are good questions. I think they're helpful. I think when we're making life decisions, we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions before we just do it. 2 more questions. 4th one is this, the maturity question. What is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Now here's what I'm not asking you there is this. Not what is the legal thing to do. Because there are things that are legal to do that aren't necessarily the wise thing to do. It's not asking what is the ethical thing even, or the allowed thing to do. It's asking a greater question, what is wise? Because when we ask ourselves those other questions, like what's allowed, or what's legal, or what's ethical, what we're really asking is what? Where's the line and how close am I allowed to get to it? Or, there's the line, how far am I allowed to step over and it's okay? Right? We all do that when we drive, or a lot of us do that when we drive. Either A, when we see the speed limit, we don't see that as the limit, we see that as the starting point, right? That's the required minimum. And the question is what? How much above that can I go and it's still okay, right? I get so many miles. I know I'll probably get at least 6 or 7 before they take a look at me or whatever. We think about that thing. And so that's that question. But that's not the maturity question. The maturity question is to say, what am I allowed to do or get away with? It's what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? There's a way we can kind of unpack and expand this question, and that's this. In light of my past experiences and my current situation and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? The Bible talks a lot about wisdom and foolishness. And whenever the Bible talks about wisdom, it's not talking about smarts, When it compares wisdom and foolishness, it's not talking about people who are smart versus people who are dumb. It's not talking about people that are educated versus people who don't. It's talking about what people do with the information that they have. What is the wise thing to do? In light of my past experiences, hey, I've kind of been here before. What did I do back then, and how did that turn out? What's the wise thing to do? In light of what's going on right now and everything that I know, what is the wise? Not what's the easy thing to do, not what's the fun thing to do, not what's the convenient thing to do, not what's the thing that I should go ahead and do because nobody else is going to find out anyway, but what is the wise thing to do? And in light of my future hopes and dreams, I know where I want to go. I know where I want to end up. What's the wise thing to do? In Ephesians, the book of Ephesians in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul was writing to the church in Ephesus, and he said this. He said, so be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but live like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't live foolishly, live wisely. How do we do that? By making the most of every opportunity, every decision, every moment, every day. Moses in the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms, I believe it's Psalm 90 or 91, he says this, Lord, teach us to number our days so we can grow in wisdom. Help us to be wise with every day, every moment in our life. And so the maturity question says, well, what is the wise thing to do in this relationship? What is the wise thing to do in this job opportunity? What is the wise thing to do as I consider college or my future steps? And the decision we can make is this: I will take the past and the present and the future into consideration when I'm making my decisions. Prayerfully saying, what is the wise thing to do? And then the fifth question that Andy Stanley writes in this book, and I think it's the key question, especially for those of us who are Christians or identify as followers of Christ. And that's this, the relationship question, which is simply this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? It's the relationship question. It's a reminder to us that every decision that we make doesn't just affect us, right? It's one of the great, I think, kind of lies or deceptions that we have sometimes is think, hey, just stay out of this. It's my life. But we fail to remember so many times the decisions we make don't just affect us, do they? Decisions you're going to make, some of you that are younger, that are, young people or young adults, and you're like, I'm just going to make decisions. The decisions you make are going to someday they're going to affect your family, your kids, people in your life. Decisions you make today will affect your extended family and friends and people that are close around you. How much? And so we ask this question as we're going to make a decision. We've said, hey, am I being honest with myself really? What story do I want to tell? Is there anything that's a kind of a tension that I need to give attention to? What's the wise thing to do? But bottom line is also this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? How is this going to affect not just me, but the people around me? Jesus said this in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. He said, so this is Jesus. He's with his disciples. This is after he's having the Last Supper with them. He has gotten down, he's washed their feet to show them what it means to serve each other. And then he says this, so now I'm going to give you a new commandment: love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. These disciples, these followers of his, had grown up as men, young men and boys, and young men and then men living under the law of Moses, the Old Testament law, and there were over 600 and some laws and commandments that they were supposed to follow. And Jesus says, hey, I'm going to give you a new commandment. I don't think he was saying, I'm going to give you number 600 and whatever. He was saying, I'm going to kind of sum this whole thing up for you. I want to boil it down to its core, and that's this: love each other. Just as I have loved you. How should we love? How should you love each other? Well, the way I've loved you. Well, let me think about that. Jesus, what does that look like? And they begin to think about all the ways that he had been sacrificial in his life for them. And ultimately, in just a few hours, he would give his very life for them fact, later on, not too long after this, he says this. He says, greater love has no one than this, that they would do what? Lay down their life for their friends. And he says, the greatest question you need to ask yourself, the thing that you need to do that needs to kind of undergird and cover over everything you do is this: love each other. Because here's the reality about this. Love doesn't seek to win an argument. Love seeks to preserve a relationship. The goal of love is not to win arguments. The goal of love is to preserve relationships. And we realize that the decisions we make, right, the statements we make, everything that we do, the directions that we take in our life have an impact on the people around us. And what does love require of me in this situation? I got to make a decision. I know what I want to do. I know I've asked myself, but the bottom line is this: what does love require of me? What's it going to be? What's it going to look like? And that's not, the decision that we need to make in response to that question is this: I will decide with the interests of others in mind. I will decide with the interests of others in mind. And you might be sitting there thinking, Derek, dude, that is not how the world works. Here's my response. Write this down in your notes. So what? Because Jesus said that to his own followers. He said this, he says, you see how the world works. You see how leaders operate and how they act. He goes, not so with you. In other words, what does that have to do with anything? So what? So what? We have the ability and the opportunity to live differently than the culture around us, don't we? And that's what Christ calls us to. And the bottom line is, when we ask this question, what does love require of me? Sometimes it's gonna mean I don't necessarily always take the direction that I thought I was going to take. Sometimes it affects the decisions that I make and the steps that go forward because I'm not doing what's maybe best for me, what most appeals to me, what's easiest for me. I'm doing what love requires of me. Some great questions that we can ask ourselves. Because if our decisions set us in a direction and our directions ultimately take us somewhere, take us to a destination, we need to make the best decisions possible. And the way that we can make those decisions, I believe, is by asking the best questions possible while making them. Am I being honest with myself, really? I know I've justified this in my mind, and I've even told some people why it's okay, but am I being honest with myself, really? What kind of story do I want to write? What kind of story do I want my life to tell? Whether it's at the end of our life when people are reflecting on the life that we lived, or it's how you want to talk about your life a year from now. What kind of story do you want to tell? Is there anything, any kind of attention that I need to pay attention to, that I need to think through? What's the wise thing for me to do in this situation? And then bottom line, foundationally, is this: what does love require? What does love require of me? How can I make that decision well? Because when we let God determine our steps, He will help us to realize our plans. Your decisions become directions, which become destinations. So what does all this mean? We've talked for a few weeks now about this idea of recalculating. We need to seek wisdom. We need to apply it. We need to ask the right questions. And when we do that, we can make the right decisions. Would y'all stand with me this morning? We wrap things up. I want to pray for you. And maybe you're here today and you've got some decisions, not just decisions about where we're going for lunch after this, but life decisions, relationships, jobs, buy, lease, rent, sell, change jobs, change career paths, pick a college, whatever, all kinds of stuff. And you're trying to figure out how you can do it. I want to pray for you that you would make wise decisions, because those decisions are going to give you a sense of direction in life. And ultimately, those directions lead somewhere, don't they? So if that's you this morning, I want to pray for you. So would you join me in prayer? Lord, thanks so much for everybody that's here today. Thank you, God, that you want to give us the divine direction that we need in our life. We've asked the question over and over the last month of, wouldn't it be great if we had a GPS for life? And the exciting answer, the encouraging, hopeful answers that we do, if we put our faith and trust in you, God, that you do want to give us the direction, the leadership that we need. You want to help us to make the turns and take the steps, make the decisions that are going to help us to navigate life, to show us the route. And ultimately, we want to arrive somewhere. Whenever you go on a trip, God, we at some point as we're following our GPS, we hear that come out of the little speaker that you have arrived at your destination, God. And we know that our life has a purpose and a meaning, and we're moving somewhere. We want to move in you and be led and directed by you. So God, as we ask ourselves the questions, sometimes those are hard questions to ask because we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to do the wise thing, not always the expedient thing. We have to do the thing that requires us to think about others and how it will affect and impact the people around us as we ask, what does love require of us? And as we ask these questions, God, we ask that you would give us clear answers, direct us and guide us. We make plans, but Lord, you direct our steps. So Father, for people in here in this room or watching via online today, God, as they're maybe trying to figure out some big steps of life, what direction to take, what job to take, what school to apply to, Lord, whether they should go on that second or third date. As they're asking all of those questions, Lord, I ask that you would give them wisdom and direction and guide them. Lead us by your Holy Spirit, I pray. In your name, amen.
You can remain standing. This will be really quick, I promise. But as you're leaving, if you have a guest card that you filled out, or if you have an offering that you put in an offering envelope, that blue bucket right back there on that table as you walk out is where those should go. The other thing, really important, especially in light of these heavy questions that we all have to think about as we leave today and go to lunch, of course. But, a year ago, back in December 2017, I had my daughter was born 2.5 months early, and it was the family here at Journey Church that prayed, and without ceasing. I actually met people that I deal with during my daily job that were praying for me. I'd never met them, but they're like, "Oh yeah, I think we're praying for you," like in our small group. And it was because of people here that had reached out to their friends and fellow prayer partners to pray for our family. And I cannot tell you how powerful prayer is. Don't leave here today without having someone to pray with you, for you, about these questions. And we have a prayer team that will be, I don't know which side, but there are going to be some people that look really weird hanging out at the side of the stage. Those are our prayer team partners because they're going to be alone. But come up and pray with them about, maybe it's what's the wise thing to do, or maybe what's this tension that I need to manage. Don't leave here without praying with somebody about that. With that, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.